Welcome to Big Up, Andreea Magdalina
Thank you for having me here. I'm
from
so
She
excited.
Said So.
Indeed. She
I'm
really
so
did.
I'm so excited to dig right in and hear from your mouth, the person who came up with it, what She Said So is all about.
She said so is all about empowering women. And you know what? There's a funny story about the name because I came up with the name because the URL was free. So I was kind of, I came up with the idea after a really terrible meeting I had that day. That was the end of 2014. I was in London. I was working for Mixcloud, which is this music streaming service from the UK. And we had a really big meeting with the BBC. So, you can imagine the kind of people who are there. And then me, this 24-year-old, young woman, my boss at the time, he's Indian and he's also, he's not your typical founder kind of wearing a suit and everything. He's very colorful, very cool. And so I don't know, it was a really terrible meeting. I felt like I basically don't exist. And that's what prompted me to start She Said. So I went home that night and I was already part of a similar group for women in technology because I was always working in, at the intersection of music and tech's always super progressive, always coming in with, disruptive models and disruptive values. Not that they have the diversity part all covered, not at all, but at the very least, they were acknowledging it. So I was a part of this group and I wanted to do exactly the same thing. I was trying to figure out names. I couldn't find anything that didn't sound too cheesy, because it's very easy to go that route. And She Said That So came up as a free URL or super cheap. I think it was $10 a year to own that URL. And I was like, I guess this is it. I guess this is the name. She Said So. Boom. That's how it came about. But yeah, essentially, I was struggling with feeling like I had a voice, like I was represented. And I felt like many of the other women I was in touch with during that time, during my job, which was an artist relations, industry relations kind of job, we were constantly meeting people. And so what I noticed is that I would have the talk or I would be emailing back and forth with the woman, but then when it came down to the decision making process or deal, she wouldn't be there, so I found that a bit odd. And that's what motivated me to put together She Said So as a way for me to just connect with other women in the industry, in music industry, just kind of double check that I'm not just being crazy, that this thing is real, that there is sexism and there is discrimination purely on the basis of gender. And what can we do about it? But first and foremost, just create a sense of community, which I believe at this point, 6 years later, we're very much there, and the word community is on everyone's lips. And it's actually been even more joyful and beautiful now during the pandemic when people couldn't get together and find community in real life. They had this digital space that we have created years ago they could turn to for inspiration, for connection, for education, and for networking, for business. There not being enough seats at the table except for one woman or one ethnic minority, that is definitely yesterday's news. Thanks to social media, was set up for diversity, diverse information, not just in terms of people, but there's so much available at their fingertips and ours as well now. But to grow up with that, I feel like this value of diversity and togetherness, even though we don't know each other, we're all strangers and friends on the internet. Because they came up with this technology, it's much more imprinted in their DNA. Whereas, especially older women we speak to, they've been through a lot. I mean, I consider myself lucky to have, grown up in a world that was already kind of, for, after that fourth wave of feminism, and women who are maybe late 40s and older, they had to deal with a lot, with all the isms in the most extreme way possible. Luckily, for example, I've never had to deal with people groping me or being asked to do, it's just inappropriate behavior. I've seen it. It didn't happen to me, and we know that it's happening a lot, and it's particularly happening with these older generation men who came up in this kind of binary mentality, and I think also exaggerated by capitalism. So it's predominantly an issue in Western countries where capitalism rules, because it basically means, it prioritizes the self, the individual over the community. Whereas I feel like coming from Romania, which is a former communist country, I mean, communism is a bad thing. I don't endorse that whatsoever. And I'm happy Romania is a democratic country now. But I think 60 years of living in a communist environment has done something to the country where there is a lot more equality between people, because that's what communism is all about. Everyone's equal, no one owns anything, it's all ours as a community. So those values really stayed, and I didn't feel as discriminated against, although human trafficking is real. There's all these other things happening in these countries as well. But from a cultural, social perspective, it definitely feels like there's more equality between sexes in the workplace. And so it was kind of shocking for me when I moved to London for the first time to notice how, in a city that was, I mean, my world got rocked. There's so much diversity in London. It's really a melting pot of cultures and people from all over. And I was shocked to see so much diversity, but at the same time, there's this very subtle, almost invisible hierarchy between people that you don't see. They just keep it kind of nice enough for everyone, so you don't ruffle, you don't shake the boat. But it's definitely there. The classism, the sexism, all the other isms, the bad isms are definitely present in these very developed societies like in the UK and US and France and Germany. And so I'm happy it's all changing right now. And I really hope that the pandemic is forcing us all, going back to what you were saying about the pandemic, about community. It feels like more and more people are realizing how important community is. And from a music industry perspective, purely because, big shows won't be allowed for a second, and it's going to be hard to go and see big artists in the same way we used to. We're now going back to our neighborhoods, to our local artists, our local venues, small independent venues where you can have maybe 20 people, because that's all there is safe right now. And so it's going to be an opportunity for the local artists, for the local creators to get more visibility.
I'm a very positive person, and it sounds like you are too. So that is my hope. I mean, I also have like the concerns of these smaller venues and artists, having to shut down. Even when and if things open up, will people really go? Like, I think at least 50% won't, that used to, which is okay if it's about social distancing. But then is that enough to sell enough booze at a bar to keep the place open?
Well, that's the thing. That model in itself, the fact that a bar or a venue relies purely on alcohol spend for them to meet costs of keeping the business alive, I think that's the very system, the very model that needs to change. And it's the same with everything else in music, isn't it? With how artists, the royalties, how they get paid from streaming, that is also going through some crazy, I believe there's a campaign that was recently launched this week to address, I think it's Justice Spotify or something like that, where there's a community of artists here in the US who are basically lobbying for Spotify to pay more in royalties per stream to artists. And I mean, that's opening another can of worms, because I'm sure Spotify would like that, but it's the labels that are holding that back, because most of that money is going to them. Then they're going to rise the price of licensing their music to Spotify. And so it's really a chicken and egg situation that's going to force everyone, all the stakeholders in this entire cycle, to really reconsider how these deals are made and how the entire system operates. It's a big thing what's happening right now.
I'm so excited to be a part of this time in the world, and to maybe have a small part in encouraging that in others, or doing that as an artist in small ways that I can. But I love when I get to meet people like you who are dedicating their life to, building organizations that really show up and put people first. Like that's it. That's what we need to do.
What I've noticed during this crisis, which has been so tough on so many people, so I also consider myself lucky to, have a roof over my head and not have to worry about my basic needs. But all these different crises, all these different challenges that have become so obvious as a result of the pandemic because the curtain has been lifted, is making me realize that, me in my little corner, which Shesaid.So, I've been, making strides in my own little world that's very gender based, right? Because we're all about empowering women and gender minorities. And what I've realized is that what I've done here in this corner is quite similar to what other people, let's say, the Black community, maybe Black Lives Matter, have been doing in their corner. What I'm realizing, we're actually fighting the same system. We might be speaking to very different points or issues that are wrong with the system, but essentially it is the same system, this white patriarchal system that we're all fighting in separate corners, and that we're slowly each of us is chipping away at it to a point where hopefully there won't be much left. Again, we're being optimistic here, and who knows how plates are going to shift, because power is definitely still, in that 1% corner, and there's a lot of it. But it's also true that more people are getting more power, and thanks to technology that hopefully we'll be able to use, and it's not going to be used against us. We've seen, in the case of Trump, how it was used against us.
And there's certain, all the areas you mentioned, or the organizations, that when the joyful bit is mostly forward facing, it seems to work faster. That's my theory, is like we just have to go opposite on the negativity stuff. We have to spend a lot of time in the joy and like believing we can get there, because there's a majority and all we need is a tipping point.
You're raising such an important point that I didn't give enough attention up until the pandemic. This idea of bringing yourself full of joy whilst you're doing whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're making a song or you're out on the streets protesting, or you're, sending an email, business email, whatever it is. If you do it with love, as you said, with joy, it somehow magically turns out to have a bigger impact or a better effect than when you don't. And I remember catching myself when I first started Shesaid.So, maybe in the first 2-3 years, when, obviously at the beginning there was a lot of knocking on people's doors and trying to get people's attention and explain why it's important that we do this and so on. After a while, the industry caught wind of it and they started reaching out to us to potentially host conversations or whatever. And in some cases, I've been put in very delicate situations where I had to have some difficult conversations with some people who, there was a lot of tokenism involved in doing this kind of work. And I could sense that they're not genuine about doing this. It was just a good look for them, but they weren't planning to actually implement any change in their company or in their club or venue or whatever it was. And so having those difficult conversations with people, tends to also make you just charge you with negativity that I would give way too much of myself to. I was leaving too much space for people to add this negativity to me, when I should have just, blocked it, or like shut it down altogether, or figure out some other way in which that negativity doesn't enter my space. Because for a while, and because I was also doing Shesaid.So in parallel with a full-time job sometimes, I was burnt out. I was destroyed. I could barely, open an email without feeling like crying. And it was so bad. It was really tough to do something so positive and actually receive so much negativity from it. Not from the community itself, but from the other side, the side that I was trying to change. And for a while, it was like that, up until I realized, hold on, like, what am I doing? This is not how it's supposed to work. Why am I doing this if it makes me feel so shit? And it took me a while to realize that it was all on me to not let that kind of thing enter my energetic level. And since the pandemic, I've actually been doing a lot more reading into these matters of, spirituality and energy. And I was always a spiritual person, but I come from a very religious family, so I kind of rejected, this idea of organized religion and being. My parents are Orthodox, very like Russian Orthodox, so it's just very dry, and there's a lot of negativity in that, in the way in which they organize themselves as a community, and it's all about not yeah for some reason it's not about joy, it's about something else, it's about suffering. And I think I kind of unknowingly, subconsciously, I took that with me, this idea that all life is suffering, and why you don't need to be happy, or like happiness is something that you have to work really hard to get and be this perfect ideal human, or something. I'm not entirely sure, I'm still kind of working through those thoughts as we speak. But what I did learn for sure is that whenever I focused my thoughts in a positive place, or from a positive angle, and I just decided to look at the half full, at the full half of the glass, that's when things actually started feeling better for me. It's almost like the universe just started throwing more opportunities at me because I was coming into it with this positive mindset.
I do think there's something to be said for just realizing that, yeah, for me personally, accepting that life is suffering and that everybody is suffering, but that what in that can I find that that can transcend that, like turn that compassion of understanding we all suffer into a way to help, right?
The next challenge from here would be, okay, how do we bring men into this mix, into seeing this just as joyful as you are, and not a counter women sort of, women trying to take over the world and build a women's only world, because that's not what we're trying to do either. We're simply trying to rebalance the scale, so it stays kind of in both places, and it's always going to be a game. It's never going to be a perfect balance, but it's been tipped over like that in favor of straight white men in particular for a really long time. And we are in this crisis, climate crisis, pandemic crisis, because of that. So we really need to change that, bring some new mentality, bring some compassion, bring some community values,
Feminine energy.
the feminine energy back into the mix. That's exactly what's happening. That's exactly. So I'm thinking from a practical perspective, because you were talking about, okay, how do we turn this negative thing into something positive by looking at the solutions? Now I'm trying to find the solutions that bring men and women together in a very kind of organic way, where we can all have these conversations together. We can all just be collaborative and supportive of each other, man to woman, woman to man, whatever, across the entire gender spectrum. And it's easier said than done, that's for sure, because in my bubble, I live in this place where there is, most of my male friends are the kind of men that I would want in my life. They are compassionate and towards others, not only towards their mom or wife, but others who aren't in their immediate community. And so that is my big question for Shesaid.So moving forward, over the next 5-10 years. Who knows? Hopefully it's going to take a lot less than that. It will be very interesting for me personally to see how the two sort of generations of thought start working together when they're going to grow up a little bit older and they're going to be in the world. I mean, a lot of them already are, right? They're kind of junior level. How do they interact with this older sort of school of thought that we come from, where things are still very binary, not just in terms of gender, but I think we've kind of grown accustomed to living to thinking about life in a very binary way, which is true. There is light and darkness, energetically speaking. But I feel like when applied in the practical world, or maybe because we've been seeing this through these male lens, it's been reduced to a very sort of, it's either black or it's white.
Right. It's like duality. It's like there's just one or the other. There's no real, middle ground.
But as humans, there's very little of that in us. We're full of gray. It's gray all over, and sometimes it's a little white, and sometimes it's a little black. But most of the times, the contours aren't so well defined, and so our humanity really needs, and our societies in which we operate need to leave a little bit of room for that gray space to manifest, and for things to not be looked at in such a binary way. But this is already very kind of theoretical, thinking. When applied in practical life, that's when things get tricky, because you do need a system in place, and we still operate in a 2D way, right? Where 1 + 1 equals 2. In quantum physics, 1 + 1 equals 1. But we haven't quite figured out how to make the connection between the quantum stuff and, Newtonian physics and laws of physics that we've been operating on so far.
I know, mostly because like we just aren't good at saying we're wrong about something, and there's an actually like we messed up. That science is, you know what I mean? There's certain things in science that grow, and we find new things that actually make more sense. And it takes a while for us to get out of the rut of like, we got it right the first time.
Yeah,
the Earth is flat.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example of that, just like let the gray be gray, and it's okay if you fucked up once, do it again until you can. Why do we need to punish people for things so much? Why do we need to be so extreme and expect the perfect when we know that things aren't perfect at all? And that's very reflected in social media. That's one thing that's really painful to see on display on social media is the hate. How quick people are to judge. And luckily in the Shesaid.So universe, we've built a digital community on Instagram, let's say, where there is less of that. But sometimes, like for example, if we posted the wrong time, like some people are so quick to just kind of jump at you and attack you for making a small mistake. And it's tricky, because you do want to use social media to highlight what's wrong and what needs to change. With that, expect a lot of trolling to happen, and a lot of people to express their opinions and to not be in agreement with you. And in a way, conversation is good, but at the same time, when it's
not about trying to understand another person's perspective, or it's about judging and pointing the finger. It's like what we were talking about before, it's just a negative, it's a feedback loop.
But sometimes the words we choose to express our thoughts aren't, fully capturing exactly what we're trying to say, and it can come across as anger or, trolling. And you're right, just coming into things with compassion and just diffusing fights and disagreements with positivity and acceptance, that usually does the trick. We had a similar thing happening in the Shesaid.So Google group about this project, quite big campaign that we're a part of.
I was on that. I saw that, and I thought it was so beautiful how it resolved.
Yeah. The community just resolved it, because firstly, we had to give that woman the space to question, to question the project, even if it was ours and it did put us in a weird position. Ultimately, it led to a really productive conversation where everyone learned a little bit more about how, library music works, and that indeed that's how it does work. And that the problem is the system itself, and we're just trying to do 0.1% to change the system, but we're still operating in this environment where, unfortunately, that's how artists get paid for producing, composing or producing for library music. And it was the perfect resolution. That's exactly what I was hoping for people from the community who are experts in this field, which we're not. To come in and clarify, either defend it or not, or give give that person more fuel to sustain their argument.
But if we just look at what we can fix in ourselves and be an example, like we can weather whatever comes at us with a kind of grace and compassion that can totally inspire others and grow that positive energy, which we need so desperately right now in this world, more of that and less of the just blanket the world with rubber and it'll be fine. So I'm just grateful that you're part of that community and that you inspired me in that way through She Said So. And for everyone out there watching and listening to LaunchLeft, go to She Said.
Just.so.
.so. That's right. Shesaid.So.
Come join us, whether you're a man, woman, company, nonprofit. Anyone can be a part of the She Said So community in different ways. Please support us on Patreon if you can. As an independent global community, we definitely rely on our members to keep us independent and fighting in their corner. So your support is more than welcome, however you can, spreading the word, supporting us financially. I really appreciate you, Rain, for giving me this platform. I'm so excited to be of the LaunchLeft community.